Thank you guys for coming, and wanted to say at the get-go that if you have any questions or complaints or comments, please just jump in and interrupt. This presentation should take about 50 minutes.
Got a complaint, can't hear you. Hold the mic close to your mouth.
How's that? Is that better? Okay. Okay. Any questions, complaints, comments, please just jump in and interrupt. Oh, hang on. Try F5.
There we go.
Okay. So the title of my presentation is Paddling in Paradise, Sea Kayak Adventures to Remote Tropical Pacific and Caribbean Islands. Next slide. And I wanted to begin by saying that these trips have all been done with my partner, Shauna Brody, who's actually right here. This is not a kayaking picture. This is Mount Shasta in the wintertime. And next slide. I also wanted to begin by just giving a bit of a background on our kayaking experience and where we're coming from and what we hope to get out of these trips when we go on them. So we've been sea kayaking for about 4.5 years. We have a fair bit of rescue training. When we're out paddling, we practice rescues several times a day. Usually when we want to just take a break, we'll jump off our boats and then practice getting back in. We've gone on about half a dozen, give or take a couple, BASK trips. We've read the Deep Trouble books and followed SAR reports, so I think we have a pretty good idea of what trouble would look like and when we can avoid it. And then we've also gone on quite a few local guided trips with Venture Quest, which is a kayaking outfit down in Santa Cruz. Okay. I also have a lot of wilderness experience, as does Shauna. I've been hiking since I was born, actually. My parents took me hiking up in Marin when my mom was pregnant. Worked in the backcountry of Yosemite for 2 summers, and backcountry skiing, all sorts of that stuff. So on these trips, at the forefront of what we're doing is safety. And we really try to be very conservative in our risk assessments. For example, on many of our trips, we don't even do any open crossings. We always have a backup plan with local people, with a local outfitter if something goes awry. And then we always carry the standard safety equipment in addition to a satellite personal locator beacon. Next question. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 sea kayaking expeditions today that we've gone on. And I think and hope that at least some of these will be to novel locations that may be off of many people's radar. So the first location is in the Bahamas to the Brigantine Keys. The second location is the Sian Khan in the Yucatan in Mexico. The third location is the Gunayala in Panama. Fourth location is East Rennell in the Solomon Islands. And then the fifth location is Tetapare, which is also in the Solomon Islands. And looking at that list, you might be wondering how we chose these kind of random sounding, or maybe not random sounding, but unusual sounding destinations. And there are really 3 criteria that I think we apply when we're choosing places to go. The first is that we really like to go to places that are off the beaten path. The fewer pictures and trip reports online, the better. The second thing is that we look for locations that have a wilderness character, islands or tropical destinations that aren't overdeveloped, that are really pristine and undisturbed. And then the last thing that we think about is places that might have unique flora and fauna, cultures, landscapes, et cetera. So this is, I think, the penultimate slide with lots of words, and then I'm going to get to lots and lots of pictures. The logistics of these trips, these are largely self-organized trips. They're not tour packages. These are not things that you can just go sign up for. They take a lot and a lot and a lot of work to prepare. Many, many emails and phone calls have gone into these trips. And they've all been done on a small budget, roughly $500 to $1,000, including airfare per person per trip. And we've used both folding kayaks and rented kayaks on the trips, depending on the destination. So last introductory slide, the motivations for this presentation. So why am I here talking to you guys? There's 3 reasons. The first is that I want to entertain you guys. I've got a bunch of great pictures and hopefully some interesting stories that will provide amusement. The second thing is to provide information. If you're interested in going on a trip, maybe one of these destinations will strike your fancy. And then the third motivation is a bit more broadly minded, which is conservation. And many of these locations, particularly, for example, the Solomon Islands, are quite poor, and the alternative to sustainable tourism or tourism may be extractive industries like logging, mining, et cetera. So if through this presentation I can promote a small amount of sustainable tourism, I think that would be a great outcome that could come of it. All right, so any questions? Outstanding. So the first expedition I'm going to talk about is the Exumas in the Bahamas. All these trips have been done with some local assistance. For this trip, we worked with Out Island explorers, particularly Dallas and Tamara Knowles, who own and run this outfitter. They rent kayaks. We brought our own kayaks on this trip. They rent sailboats. They're just fantastic, and they were super helpful in directing us where to go, providing transportation to launch sites, and so forth. So where are the Exumas? Well, they're an archipelago in the Bahamas. Next slide. Which is southeast of Florida. And they actually span the Tropic of Cancer. So the southern end of the Exumas is south of the Tropic of Cancer, and the northern end is north of it. But they're warmed by the Gulf Stream, so it's really quite tropical throughout the Exumas. And there's, I don't know how many keys in the Exumas. There's probably at least 500, I would guess, or a couple hundred to be sure. And most of them are uninhabited. They're small, sandy keys with low scrubby vegetation for the most part. Some of them are made out of limestone. And most of the keys don't have any potable water. So kayaking trip, you got to pack all your own water, which really isn't a big deal if you're going out for 4 or 5 days. Threats to the Exumas. The Bahamas actually has a really good conservation record. They have a great national park system. That said, there is a fair amount of development that's been going on, particularly in the north part of the Exumas, and that could spread south. On the Exumas, there's several species of endangered endemic rock iguanas, these giant lizards. They're quite incredible, and I'll have a bit more to say about those. And on this trip, we flew to Great Exuma, which is the island in this picture. In particular, we flew into Georgetown, which is right about there. Well, actually, that's where the airport is, and we stayed in the town of Georgetown the first night in a little hotel, and then got a ride up to where we started, which was at the north end of Great Exuma. And this is a big island. I think that's probably about 50 miles or so long. Next slide. Right, so we stayed in Georgetown and took an early morning ride to where we started out. Next slide. So that's a little bit of background on the Exumas, and now I'm going to talk about what we did there. So this was I guess a 4-day trip. We started at this creek called Odie Creek, which is actually just a tidal channel. There's this little gap in the islands, and there's a bridge across there. That's where we started out. And we paddled from there out to one of the keys. So these are the Brigantine Keys, and we paddled out to this key, which is Long Key. And this is a picture from the first evening on Long Key. Beautiful sandy beach, mangroves growing out of it, all sorts of interesting fish in the mangroves.
Looks like Houston.
How high above sea level was the key?
Oh, the key probably, the highest was maybe 2 meters. They're quite low.
Yeah.
You would not want to be on one of these in a hurricane.
Maybe not.
Yeah. Next slide. This is a picture from our camp spot on Long Key the the morning after we arrived. Again, this is from our camp spot. This was actually one of the few keys that we visited in the Exumas that had coconut palms, and I believe that these were probably planted there. They don't grow native in the Exumas. There's a species of palm that is native, though. That's much smaller. Okay, so that was Long Key. And then on the second day, we continued along, and these are not huge distances. This is maybe 5 miles from here to here. So we continued on. We went to another key called New Key. And, we camped there. Well, that's all I'd say about that. So this was as we were pulling out of Long Key on day 2. And we paddled a little ways, and we're maybe, I don't know, half a mile, quarter mile offshore, and we came across a sandbar, which was just sand, just barely submerged in the middle of the ocean, and an incredibly beautiful place. So we stopped there, took some pictures, had a little food. This is the sandbar. These waves were making just the most incredible sounds, sort of just breaking on this little sandbar.
How deep?
Oh, the sandbar, I mean, it was, when the waves weren't on it, it would be exposed.
The cloud was really wild.
Yeah, so the cloud is actually over the main part of the Exumas, so the archipelago sort of goes like that, and the clouds were following that. Yeah?
Can you briefly describe what kind of provisions you packed and how much weight you carried in the kayaks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, how much did we pack and how much weight did we have? So we bring, on all these trips actually, we've brought all our own food from San Francisco. And we usually, we pack as if we're going backpacking. So for 4 days, that might be 10 to 15 pounds of food maximum. The heavy part was the water. Obviously, we were carrying about a gallon per person per day, which actually turned out to be way more than we needed. Because in the wet tropics, you don't sweat or you don't lose water quite as quickly as you might think. So all total, our boats with the water probably had maybe 70 pounds. I'm not sure offhand. They were heavy, but manageable for sure. I mean, not a big deal. There's another question?
What kind of tides did you see here?
In the Bahamas, they were not big, except when I get to the next map, you'll see between each island there's a little channel, and those are very deep. So everywhere is shallow, maybe a meter or 2 deep, except the channels between the islands, which are scoured out by the tides, and those are on the order of maybe 20 meters deep. So you get they're practically rivers running through these channels when the tide is changing. Yeah. Let's see. Just back up maybe 2 slides. Yeah, so that was Sandbar. Next slide. Leaving the Sandbar, continuing on to New Key, and this was our campsite at New Key. We snorkeled. This is one of the channels. It doesn't look that deep in this picture, but it is actually really deep. And we snorkeled in there when the tide was slack and saw some really unusual creatures. Next slide. Another picture from our camp spot. We actually camped back in here on New Key. This island was really interesting. It had these large land crabs, which I've never seen before. Quite peculiar. Okay, so from New Key, on day 3, we actually just went a very short distance to a little unnamed key. And we liked it so much that we just decided to stop there. So camped on this unnamed key, and I have a bunch of pictures of this. So this was leaving New Key in the morning. Our boats are full boat Coopers, which we got before full boat folded up. And they've really served us great for the types of trips that we do.
Were your campsites official campsites? Or just
Yeah, that's a great question. So camping, to our knowledge, is permitted pretty much anywhere on these keys that are not marked as private property. And in fact, I believe in the Bahamas you're allowed to camp on any beach up to high tide line or something along those lines. So according to Dallas, the guy who we were sort of working with, we could just plop down anywhere, and that's exactly what we did. Oh, that's very nice. So this is the sandbar at that island, the key that we stayed at, and it was just gorgeous. Next slide. There's Shauna relaxing in the water. Water temperatures, I think, were probably at least 80 degrees. This was in November, so end of the summer, water temperatures were quite high. Yeah?
As in Baja, do you have to worry about stingrays?
Oh, yes, I'm glad you asked. So we have a stingray story. Next slide. So we spent the afternoon snorkeling around. There's some channels that were kind of over here. And at one point, I turned around, and there was an enormous stingray right behind me. And by enormous, I mean the size of me. And, you know, I mean, they're not out to get you as long as you're paying attention. So it was no harm done. But there were lots of stingrays, lots of reef sharks, none of which were harmful to our knowledge. Lots of turtles out here, lots of fish. There's very little fishing pressure. And I should say, in the Exumas, in 4 days, I think we saw a couple of kayakers for about 2 minutes and a sailboat on the horizon, and that was it. So these pictures are not, you know, there isn't a crowd of sunbathers over here. This is what it looked like everywhere. This was from that key, the unnamed key. Next slide. Another picture. These are the scrubby palms that are native to the Bahamas. Next picture. Another shot. Onward. Okay, and then this is me. And the thing I wanted to point out here is, if you look at the undersides of the clouds, they're a little bit blue. And that's not an artifact of the picture. That's actually how they were. And the water in the Bahamas is so blue that it reflects up onto the clouds and makes them blue. And it's just really fantastic. Next slide. Okay, so from there we paddled to Lily Key. So we started heading back. Lily Key is right there. Next slide. Camp there. This was on our way out in the afternoon. Just beautiful ocean, calm seas.
Did you ever paddle away from the side of land?
No, definitely not. As I say, we're very risk averse on these trips. So we landed on Lily Key, and there were some unusual tracks leading into the dunes. And being a curious sort, I followed them, and this is what was at the end of them. This is one of the rock iguanas that's endemic to the Exumas. It was big. It was iguana-sized.
Which is what, about 6 or 8 inches tall?
Yeah, maybe. About, yeah, I'd say. He's a big lizard. Yeah. And we were really fortunate to see one, because there aren't a lot of these left in the world.
Were there other toxic or poisonous animals on these islands?
Not to my knowledge. There might have been scorpions or black widow spiders. None that we saw, that's for sure. Stingrays probably were the biggest thing to watch out for, and they're easy enough to avoid.
Did you have the stingrays swimming in the water around you, or did you have the stingrays in the shallows that you could step on?
Both of the above. Yeah. So you do the stingray shuffle. Okay, next slide. This is the channel at Lily Key. Next slide. Again, another picture of the channel. You can see a little bit of the tide race in there. Oh, there's a little bit of a duplicate there. Anyway, next slide. This is our campsite was right around the bend here.
Were you able to get good information about the tides and the currents around these keys?
No.
Pretty much had to just observe what was going on.
Yes, yeah. But the channels are short enough that, and we were never in a position where we absolutely had to get, through one or up one. We were just, we camped wherever we wanted. So had we not been able, for example, to get up the channel to this corner of Lily Key, we would have just stayed on the other side. So last day, we woke up early and paddled out, and then got on a plane a few hours later and flew to Boston. So a few more pictures here, and then we should get on to the next destination. This is our camp spot. You'll notice it's quite close to the ocean, but by this point in the trip, we had figured out the tides and knew about how high things would get at night. And then this was back on Long Key, just super clear water and really calm. And the next picture is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So. Okay, So that's the Exumas. And now, now I want to go to Mexico, to the Sian Khan. And next slide. The assistants, or the people that assisted us here were Kimberly Noakes and Victor, whose last name I can't recall. But they're part of Mahahwal Eco Tours. And this was not a guided trip again, but they gave us transportation to a really remote fishing village that we started from, gave us local contacts, got us permission to paddle where we wanted to go, and were just incredibly supportive. Next slide. So Sian Khan is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's located in the southern part of the Yucatan, just north of Belize. And it translates to origin of the sky, which is actually pretty appropriate, because when you go there, there's a tremendous amount of sky. It's somewhat threatened by development, I think. It's close to Cancun and Tulum and that whole largely developed area. And I think there's some chance of it moving south into this area. To get there, we flew into Cancun and then took a taxi. So Cancun is right there, and Mahahwal, the town that Victor and Kimberly were based out of, is there. So we took a taxi down, which was surprisingly affordable. It was about a 5-hour drive.
Is that close to Ichbua?
I don't know offhand.
National Park there?
I don't know offhand. So the Sian Khan is basically this region right here. There's 2 big bays. These are both almost the size of San Francisco Bay. And there's no roads. It's just kind of wilderness right now for the most part. From Mahahwal, so Mahahwal is right there. We took a 2-hour jeep ride through the jungle to this point right there, and ended at this little fishing village of Punta Herrero, which was very little. No stores, no hotels, just a couple of houses on stilts and fishermen who work there seasonally. So from Punta Herrero, we paddled into Bahia del Espiritu Santo, which is this big bay. And it's huge. We didn't paddle the whole thing. We just sampled it. So here's a little bit more of what we saw and did there. We started at Punta Herrero, which is right there, and paddled east and stopped at a little point here in the bay. And that's where we camped. This is our campsite here, well, we camped right around this bend. First night or evening, we had beautiful rainbows, calm seas, and a nice sunset as well. So this is our sunset that we got on the first night. This is from our campsite. This was our private beach. On this trip, we really didn't see anyone. This is remarkably unvisited. The only person we did see was on the last day. We had told the fishermen our plans, and they were actually going to give us a ride back to Mahahwal because they were heading out. So we weren't late or anything, but they got nervous about us and came out and checked up on us on the last day. And we said we're fine, and we paddled back, and then they gave us a ride out. So, oh, and the other thing is that I'm not fluent in Spanish, but Shauna is, which was really handy on this trip because in Punta Herrero, no one spoke Spanish, or no one spoke English, rather. Okay, so next slides. Second day, we just did a day trip. We explored further south and then returned to the same camp spot. This was leaving our camp spot. This is mangrove on actually one of the islands where we stopped, island in the bay where we stopped. Shauna out in the bay, and I think this picture really captures how big the sky is in the Sian Khan, kind of the origin of the sky, as they call it. Another picture of Shauna. This was paddling back. This is I guess it's primary forest. This has never been logged. Parked the boat on a beach and snorkeled. Saw some great fish and creatures. Next slide. Such as this little stingray. And one thing that was remarkable about the Sian Khan was how clear the water was. And this is deep within a bay. So I think that's a measure of how undisturbed this place is and how pristine it is. This was paddling back toward camp in the evening. And as we were paddling back, something really remarkable happened. A flock of flamingos flew right overhead in the sunset, which was great. And there's Shauna just about back at camp.
Did you leave your tent set up in camp?
Yes, yeah, we did. And I think we weren't particularly worried about theft, but we probably, yeah, I mean, we took our valuables, obviously. So on the last day, this trip was cut a little bit short because we were somewhat at the whim of the fisherman's schedule to get out. So it was actually only a 3-day trip. We had hoped to do it longer. But on the last day, we paddled out. And this was the morning at a little island next to our camp spot. Shauna getting going, heading out. It was a bit breezy. There was some parts that were into the wind. So the wind is almost always out of the east in the tropics, and this was no exception. I think the highest winds that we got on this trip were maybe 15 or 20 knots, but luckily we were able to get out of them pretty quickly. And then this is a sunset from Punta Herrero when we got back. Okay, so that is the Sian Khan. And the next place I want to take you to is in Panama. It's the Gunayala. And just out of curiosity, show of hands, who's heard of the Gunayala? Okay, great. Well, this is good because it's a place that I think everyone should know about. So the Gunayala can only be kayaked with a guide. And actually, you have to have a guide who's Guna, which is an indigenous group there. So we had 2 guides, one of whom was American Eileen Price, and she's just absolutely fantastic. I can't recommend her more highly. And then Nemesio Alfaro, who is a Guna. And we also coordinated with Expediciones Tropicales and Vicky Chacon, who was very helpful in getting this organized. They do tours that are more structured than what we did, but we wanted just kind of the bare bones. We'll bring our own equipment, take care of ourselves, and she set that up for us, and it really worked out fantastic. Next slide. So where's the Gunayala? Well, for one, it's in Panama. It's a semi-autonomous region. It's governed by the Gunayala people. And interestingly enough, when you're transferring into the Gunayala from within Panama, you actually have to show your passport. So it's part of Panama, but not entirely. It has a really distinct culture, and the culture is really vibrant there, and I'll show some slides and talk a little bit more about that. It's on the Caribbean side of the isthmus, so it's right in here. And it's just east of the Panama Canal. So here's the Panama Canal. Panama City is right about in there, and that's where the Gunayala is. The Guna have done a really nice job of protecting their land. For instance, most of the primary rainforest remains intact in the Gunayala. You can see that there's all this nice green here where the rainforest hasn't been cleared. And to get there, we flew into Panama City, which is actually remarkably easy from here. You can get a direct flight, red-eye, get there in the morning, and then you can get an evening flight back that's direct as well, and do this trip almost in a weekend, which is just incredible when you think about it. So we flew into Panama City and took a Jeep for about 2.5 hours to Carti, which is a little town in the Gunayala, right about there. And then from there, we took a taxi boat with kayaks attached to some of the outer islands. So these are the Cayos Holandeses. And then the trip was basically to paddle back to where we started. So it was a one-way trip, mostly downwind. And all total, I think this was about 40 miles or so. It's quite a ways. There were some big crossings on this trip. We wouldn't have done these on our own, but we had guides who were confident, and we felt that they would be able to help us out if we got into trouble. Okay, so Gunayala, this was April of last year. First day, we camped up in the Hollandaise Keys. And from there, we paddled. We had a big crossing on the first day to this little key called Ordub Tarboat, which is named after a boat that apparently sank there. Next slide. And we camped on that island. So this is a picture of, well, that's actually Ordub Tarboat, and this is from a little key that was right next to it. We went with 3 friends, managed to get a crew together for this trip, which worked out great.
Is that some sort of a whalebone in the previous picture?
No, I think it's just a funny piece of driftwood. Yeah. I liked how it looked, though. The islands in the Gunayala are kind of like what you might picture as a cartoon tropical island. They're little piles of sand with palm trees sticking out of them. This is one of the islands. Next slide. Here's Shauna paddling around. And the islands are surrounded with beautiful coral reefs. The only coral reefs that we've seen that come close and actually maybe surpass them are in the Solomon Islands, which I'll talk about next. But for somewhere in the Caribbean, this is just the best coral reefs you'll find anywhere.
So they're not bleached out?
They're not bleached, no. There's tremendous number of fish, all sorts of animals in them, lots of, and I believe this has some of the highest coral diversity in Panama or in Central America. Okay, so that was the first day, and then second day. And then the third day, we paddled to an island right nearby, which was also really beautiful, and camped there. And I'll show some pictures of what transpired on that day. So this is packing up camp on, I guess, day 3. On Ordub Tarboat, there's one Guna person who lives there. He's a caretaker. And there's a number of structures. And we were able to camp under this roof, which was great because it rains at night in the tropics.
What about temperatures?
Temperatures, that's a great question. So it's hot at night. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the game. And we've taken to bringing a small portable fan on these tropical trips. And that is really wonderful, to just have a little breeze. The other trick is to always camp in the wind. Find the windiest place you possibly can to sleep in the tropics. But temperatures during the day, the other thing though is it never gets that hot during the day because you're on the ocean, so it's just always warm basically. So I think hottest might have been 85, coolest might have been 80. You know, it's kind of that sort of deal. And lots of rain at night. During the day, the weather was quite nice. Picture from the morning from Ordub Tarboat. Next slide. Again, this is right from our camp spot. Beautiful, clear water. Here's a picture of Ordub Tarboat. Next slide. Okay, so we were finishing up breakfast, and a boat of Guna people came to Ordub Tarboat. And I think they were visiting the guy who lived there, but they had also heard about us and wanted to sell textiles to us, which we bought some of. And the Guna make these beautiful, beautiful textiles called molas, which I'll have a picture of in the next slide. But what I wanted to say first is that the Guna women still dress traditionally in these beautiful, beautiful clothes. And this is, just back up one more slide. So that's Eileen, our guide, and Shauna next to her. So this is a picture of some of the molas. Unfortunately, we didn't actually take pictures of the ones they had. We bought a couple of them. But they're these intricate designs made on pieces of cloth. Next slide. And this is the boat that they pulled up in. This is our friend Indira, who was on that trip with us. Next slide. These are the Guna. Again, the women are dressed traditionally. The men typically have Western dress. Next slide. And then this is paddling out toward the next island that we stayed at. We stopped and had a break on a sandbar on the way. Yeah?
The Guna boats, are those rowed or motor?
They had motors, although there are some that they would row, and I have some pictures of those as well. Yeah. So this is the sandbar, beautiful clear water, maybe 5 inches deep. Next slide. There's Shauna. I think maybe, I know that we collected a bunch of conch on the sandbar, and some people ate them for dinner. This was.
How did they cook them?
Oh, no. So I didn't cook them, but Nemesio, our Guna guide, built a fire out of palm fronds, and then he had this elaborate way of roasting them, and they seemed to come out quite well.
Did he pound them?
I'm sorry?
Did he pound?
He did. Shauna says yes. Yeah. Okay, so this was leaving the sandbar. The following, well, after lunch, I guess. A little boat picture. Onward. Oh, and then we stopped at an island just next to where we camped, and this was really beautiful. So this is Eileen, exceedingly clear water. Next slide. And there were starfish. And this picture, I think, really captures something of what it was like there. It was outstanding. And this island, I should have added, is that island was totally uninhabited. And this is actually the island that we camped on, also uninhabited. This is all coral reef under here. So we parked our boats fairly early in the afternoon and spent the afternoon snorkeling in these reefs, which were really incredible. Okay, on the penultimate day, we paddled from that island to an island with a very long name. And I think this was a long day. This was, I think, 15, 20 miles. It was quite a distance. Next slide. So we paddled by all sorts of beautiful uninhabited keys. Lots of turtle grass, seagrass beds. This is again coral that you can see. We had one double on this trip, which came in handy because I don't think this was the case in this picture, but occasionally people would get tired and we could give them some relief. Beautiful turtle grass or seagrass beds. And actually, in this picture you can see the continental divide. So that's the Isthmus of Panama and the continental divide. These are Guna fishermen. And I think that this boat probably didn't have a motor. I think they may have been using a pole, although I don't remember for sure how they got around.
Do the Guna people have their own language?
Yes, they do. Yeah. Yeah.
Do they also speak Spanish?
Most people do. Yeah. Not being a Spanish speaker myself, I didn't really get a good sense of how many, but yeah. This was our lunch stop, beautiful palm trees. And then another glorious island with coral reefs all around it.
Did you do any fishing?
I didn't, but Nemesio, so I know Nemesio bought fish occasionally from fishermen who we'd pass, and I can't remember if he actually fished or not. But in the Solomon Islands, I have a great story about fishing, which I'll get to.
Did you get to eat a lot of fish on this trip?
I personally didn't, but some of us did. And there was popcorn. Eileen brought popcorn. That's her favorite thing to bring on these trips, apparently. So, this was sunset from close to that island with a long name. Okay, so final day we paddled to a Guna community called on Isla Maquina. It was a fairly short day, and then from there we took a taxi over back to Carti, a water taxi. So this was in the morning as we were leaving camp. These are Guna fishermen, and I'm pretty sure that they don't have a motor on that boat. And this is a picture from the Guna community. So most of the islands are uninhabited, but a number of them are densely inhabited and have almost what you'd call cities. So the houses, the Guna houses are built traditionally, they're built out of palm. And there were actually a lot of people in this town, but you're not supposed to take pictures of them. So I found a spot where no one was and took this picture. But you can imagine people throughout the city. And we got a chance to visit the school and the sort of local meeting house. And it really is quite an interesting place to be. I believe so. Not a whole lot, but I'm pretty sure they must have had some solar. One thing that is interesting about there is the plumbing, which is non-existent. Outhouses are just perched over the ocean. We didn't encounter any recognizable pollution, but you know, there are issues with that, to be sure.
What was it like sound, the sounds like in the community?
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't really recall. I mean, you know, people talking, kids playing, maybe dogs. We weren't there for super long. We only stayed maybe 2 hours in the community. But I know that if you go at the correct time, you can go and see traditional dances and so forth. And there are tours that are, so the Gunayala is actually somewhat on the tour map. People often will go as a part of a tour package and be driven out to certain tourist islands, which is what we did not want to do. We wanted to see sort of off the beaten path. So there is a decent amount of tourism there. Okay, so last two places in the last 20 or so minutes are going to be East Rennell and Tetapare. And these are both in the Solomon Islands. So there's no way in the world that we could have gone to East Rennell without some support. And in particular, Kevin Saueha, who is from East Rennell, was incredibly helpful and provided us, talked to people, got us permission, places to go, explained where we could go, where we couldn't go, and is really trying to promote tourism on East Rennell because the alternative is cutting all the trees down there, it seems. Next slide. So when we were getting ready to go on this trip, I called my phone company, and I was curious if I had any kind of signal in the Solomon Islands. This is T-Mobile. So I was curious, do I have any phone signal in the Solomon Islands? And you know, if so, what is the cost to use it? And the woman who answered the phone had apparently been working there for 20 years, and she said in all her years of working there, she'd never heard of anyone going to the Solomon Islands. And she didn't actually know where it was. So if you haven't heard of the Solomon Islands or don't know exactly where it is, you're with the majority probably. So the Solomon Islands are northeast of Australia. They're east of Papua New Guinea. To get there from here, it's probably easiest to fly through Brisbane, Australia. And the Solomon Islands have really very little tourism. And that's not because they're unsafe, because they're actually really very safe right now. It's more because there's hardly any tourist infrastructure there. We went to East Rennell, and as far as we know, we're the first people who've ever kayaked there. And we would never have been able to do this without Kevin's help, because it's kind of just a dot on the map, almost. East Rennell is a really unique place. It has a very high concentration of endemic species. So these are species that occur only on East Rennell and nowhere else in the world. There are birds, lizards, bats, and other mammals that only occur on East Rennell. And that's because East Rennell is separated from the nearest islands by quite a distance, and has also been undisturbed. For instance, rats have not been introduced until very recently there. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it's also critically threatened, and it's listed on the World Heritage Site list that's in danger, particularly by logging. And we saw plenty of evidence of this.
How did you manage the airfare there for less than a grand?
That's a great question. We found a magic credit card offer, which gave us a bunch of miles. And this trip actually probably ran us more on the order of 1,500, but it was quite reasonable, I think, for a vacation. You know, I mean, a cruise, for example, would probably cost more than that. So we flew into Rennell. We landed on this little dirt airstrip in the jungle in Tigoa, which is a little town, and then took a 4-hour Jeep ride across the island. This is about, I think, 40 kilometers to the end of the road, which is right there. And there's a big lake here, which is Lake Tagano, which is the largest freshwater lake in the Pacific.
Did you have to fly in through Honiara?
Yes, yeah, we flew through Honiara and took a tiny, actually not a tiny, small but ancient Twin Otter propeller plane. Took us to Rennell. And they canceled our flight 5 minutes before it was about to take off because no one was on it, and then uncanceled it because they figured out that someone else on Rennell was trying to get out to Brisbane that day. So we were lucky and we were able to get in.
I would have been worried about out.
Yeah, that was a legitimate concern as well, but we dealt with that when we came to it. So this trip was actually just a couple months ago. And we started at the end of the road at this village called Tegano. And we got to Tegano, got all our kayaking stuff out. So we brought our folding kayaks on this one. And the whole village came out and gathered around us because this was a genuine novelty to see people with boats show up there. There is some tourism, though, particularly birders, because birders have life lists where you want to check off every bird, and there are these birds that only live on Rennell, so they'll go to Rennell to see these birds. So from there, we hired porters to carry our boats for about an hour and a half through the jungle down to this little beach here. And Rennell is surrounded by a lagoon, so it's hard to see in this picture, but there's actually a fringing reef around here and a lagoon that's protected all the way around. So our plan was to paddle in this lagoon. And from there, we launched and just paddled a little ways on the first day because by the time we got everything set up and were rolling, it was already late in the afternoon. So this is a picture of the airstrip. It actually looks quite tidy in this picture. It was, more or less. The terminal was a small hut next to it. And then this is the lagoon and the reef around Rennell. And this is from Tugahogo Lookout, which is where we climbed through the jungle and then dropped down. So we launched from right down here. This is a picture of Shauna, and this is one of the Rennellese people who helped carry our stuff over. And interestingly enough, the people in Rennell have their own language called Rennellese.
Is this the two of you?
Yeah, so they dropped us off. There were about 3 guys who helped out and 1 kid who really wanted to come. And they dropped us off. We're very concerned about us setting off, but Kevin had sort of said that we knew what we were doing, and they let us go, and then it was just Shauna and I.
Did they carry your boats put together, or?
No, they fit. So our boats fit in big backpacks. I mean, we can check them as luggage. So they're about 50 pounds each.
So you waited until you got to this beach to put your boats together?
Yeah, it would have been completely impractical to carry the boats over
And
assembled.
did you carry water?
Yeah, so there were actually springs right along the bottom of the cliffs that were fresh water, and we were able to get water from them. It's worth noting, I should have said this earlier, so Rennell is a raised atoll. I'm not exactly sure the geologic process that made this happen, but it's basically a flat island with cliffs all around it. It's like an atoll that got shifted up, and then there's a second lagoon that's formed around that.
Are they Micronesians or Melanesians?
Oh, that's a great question. So the Solomon Islands has Polynesians, Micronesians, and Melanesians. And Rennell is actually a Polynesian outlier. So this is a picture from the morning on the beach where the first camp spot. We got a couple of pictures from there. I thought it was exceedingly beautiful. This is the lagoon the tide was in, so you can't really make out the edge of the reef out there. Oh, and I should add that even though we were on our own, we had arranged to check in with Kevin very regularly, and he was sort of keeping tabs on us. So there was a plan in place if we ran into any trouble.
Were you checking in by cell phone or by marine radio?
Neither. We actually were using our satellite beacon. So again, from our camp spot, really beautiful morning. A little stormy, but it cleared up quickly enough. Okay, so day 2, we continued paddling southeast and stopped at a really remote beach and camped there, right there. This is Shauna. This is actually next to a big spring in the rocks right behind me.
Were there lots of springs or just there where you launched?
No, they were everywhere, yeah.
Do you have to filter or treat water?
Yeah, we used a water filter. We elected not to use iodine because I actually just recently learned this, but apparently iodine doesn't kill cryptosporidium. So filter is better for that. This is paddling up the lagoon. You can see it's really calm. The reef is right there, and outside of the reef, the ocean was very rough, and at least for us, would not have been reasonable to paddle in. Clear water, unusual kinds of limestone formations under it. There's actually a lot of living coral, although in this picture, this is mostly dead. And then we came to a waterfall, which might not sound too unusual, except this is a waterfall in the ocean. So the lagoon, so remember the lagoon is parallel to the island. So the lagoon goes that way, and then the ocean would be behind me. And what I think was happening is that the ocean was getting blown up sort of into the lagoon and then was flowing down and out. And this was a legitimate waterfall. It was about 1 meter tall across the lagoon. So obviously we had to drag our boats over this thing. So I continue up it. Here's a coral that was growing in this waterfall. Another interesting feature of the lagoon was that there were whirlpools. There were places where there were caves that went through the reef. And when the tide was going out, these were legitimate whirlpools that would be swirling around, going out of the reef, which, in the boats were not a big deal, but if you got sucked into one of those, that would be probably the end of you. Here, this was the sunset on that day. Shauna paddling along. This is the lagoon again. Here, the reef crest was actually quite high and was kind of almost a jetty, like a wall. Nice sunset that day. Interestingly enough, so this looks very easy to paddle in, but there were coral heads probably every, 100 or so meters. And with the fading light, it was very tricky to see them. So we unfortunately crashed into a number of big coral heads. I know that the coral did more damage to our boats than we did to the coral. Sunset. And then our camp spot was right kind of in front of where Shauna is there. Okay, day 3, we explored further down the coast and then returned and camped just a little ways from where we had started out. So this is continuing down the lagoon. It was quite windy. We were going straight into the wind. Wasn't a particularly big deal because it was very protected. And then coming out, we were just downwind, which was very fast. This was some of the primary rainforest. So East Rennell, as of now, is still entirely covered in primary forest. It has never been logged. And this was one of the most beautiful beaches I think I've ever been to. We stopped at these huge trees overhanging the beach. Another picture of this beach. I really like this place. Gorgeous patterns in the leaves. And here's Shauna getting ready to continue on. So this is about where we turned around. You can see that the reef actually sort of pinches in, the lagoon pinches in. You could get through here, though, particularly at high tide, and go another, I don't know, 5 or 10 miles. We were on the sheltered side of the island, so we were out of the wind. Had we sort of continued around the headlands, I think it would have gotten progressively more difficult to paddle. And incidentally, I think this picture I just discovered, but Kevin apparently decided to use one of these pictures for his website, which I thought was really nice. One thing that was really intriguing about East Reno is that when we were planning our trip, there were about, I don't know, 10 pictures online of it, and only one of them was really appealing looking. So it was kind of this big question mark. This looked like a fantastic place, but what is it like? I don't know. So I see I'm running a little low on time, so maybe we'll scoot through these pictures a little quickly. This is back at the waterfall on the way out. Next slide. Again, waterfall. Next slide. And then this is our camp on the last day. There's our tent. We dragged our boats up so they wouldn't get washed away at night.
Is that damp rock the height of the high tide?
Yes, and there was actually quite a bit of tidal fluctuation in the Solomon Islands. I think it
got pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, and there wasn't a lot of real estate for camping. That was the other thing.
Did you wake up in the middle of the night to watch the tide?
The first night we did, but by this point we had figured it out. I mean, you kind of get to know, like, here's where the vegetation stops. It's good. So when we camped here, we were confident about it. But the first night, definitely, there was some concern. Okay, last day, we paddled back to Hugago, packed up the boats, and then the guys who carried them over met us there and carried them back for us. And we spent the night back in Tegano. So this is the last morning at our camp spot. We got an early start, partially to take advantage of the high tide. Much easier to paddle in the lagoon when the tide is covering all the coral. Real beautiful sunrise. And then paddling through the lagoon, just a gorgeous day. And there are all these nice coral heads, which we had a chance to snorkel in and enjoy.
Or bump your kayaks into.
At low tide. By this point, we had also figured out we had to paddle at high tide, which is at night there. So it's nocturnal high tides.
Was the coral like brain coral, or was it like stag coral?
There was all kinds. I think, so I don't know what the coral diversity is in Rennell, but in the next place, which is the last one I'm going to talk about, I believe there's close to 500 species of coral. So
sea conditions outside?
Exceedingly rough. Although it depended exactly what aspect you were on, but where it was exposed to the wind, it was really gnarly. Not something that we could deal with. I think the winds were probably 25 to 30 knots in big swells because, it's just the Pacific for thousands of miles. This was the beach that we stopped at and snorkeled. These are all these great coral heads that we were exploring. Lots of limestone. The whole island is made out of limestone.
See any people?
No, no. And I think, for one, it's very hard to get to. For two, it would be quite tricky to get anything besides a kayak down this lagoon because it's so shallow. You have to time it just right if you're going to try to drive a motorboat in there. So did not see a single person. Yeah?
Since you're mostly looking for wilderness areas to paddle, what pointed you in the direction of Rennell?
That's a great question.
In the middle of nowhere.
Well, yeah, that was the idea. We wanted to explore the Pacific, particularly the South Pacific. And there actually aren't that many islands in the South Pacific that are amenable to sea kayaking that aren't developed. There's some in Vanuatu. There are these islands in the Solomon Islands. There's a little bit in Papua New Guinea, which is of questionable safety right now. But there just isn't that many places like this left in the world that you can really go exploring now.
How did you dress?
So we always wear pants and a shirt, long sleeve shirt. That's for bugs and sun. And very important to wear shoes when you're walking in the water because of stonefish, which if you step on them and get injected by their spines, you have a big problem on your hands. So this is paddling back. This is near Tuhugago. This is a picture of the first beach that we had camped on. We were passing by it on the way out. There are a few coconut palms, and we're lucky enough to find a few coconuts as well, and we brought this special tool for opening them up, so we occasionally had coconuts to drink. And then this is the last picture. This is back in the village, and these are the villagers. And so it is a Polynesian, most people are of Polynesian descent, but there is, I guess, some Melanesian influence as well.
Is there a predominant religion?
Yes, Christianity. So, and there's a long history to that, which I don't recall the details of, but it's this complicated story. It's not quite as simple as you would think.
Do you know what the sign that they were making means?
I have no idea. I don't know.
See that all over the South.
Yeah. One thing that was sad was that a lot of people chewed betel nut and made their teeth really rotten and red. Very, very pervasive there. Okay, so try to get through this in the last 10 minutes. I know we're a bit over time. The last island is Tetapare, and again, required assistance to do this. We reached out to the Tetapare Descendants Association, and there actually is some tourism on Tetapare, so this was in a way kind of set up for us to visit, although the idea of kayaking around Tetapare was completely novel. And our guide was a guy named Lazarus, whose last name I never caught. Tetapare is also in the Solomon Islands. We visited it as part of the trip to Rennell. And it's actually the largest uninhabited island in the South Pacific. And to give you an idea of how big this island is, it has several rivers. It's, I think, maybe 40 miles long. It's unspoiled. It's covered in a primary rainforest, and it's more or less protected.
You said you did this on the same trip?
Yeah.
So you flew in and then went to 2 different islands for 2 different kayak trips?
Exactly, yeah. And we had basically a week at each with transportation and so forth. Tetapare supposedly is the second highest coral diversity in the world. The highest diversity is in Raja Ampat in Indonesia. And the coral diversity in Tetapare is just behind it. It's almost the same. There's all sorts of interesting wildlife, including saltwater crocodiles, which...
Aren't we on their prey list?
Yes. And I have a quick story about that. So the first day out, we saw a saltwater crocodile out in the ocean. And the plan was to snorkel later that afternoon, which would give someone pause. So we asked our guide, is it safe to snorkel? And he said, yeah, it's fine. You're good. So, I mean, we trusted him. And also, there have never been any issues with that crocodiles and people on Tetapare, to our knowledge. So anyway, we snorkeled, had a fabulous time. And then later that evening, we asked him, how did you know the crocodile was gone? And he said, well, I talked to it, which maybe isn't the best defense against crocodiles, but we were safe enough, so it seemed to work. Tetapare is home to several endemic species and only live there. We flew to Munda, which is a town up here, and then took a motorboat about an hour across the ocean to get to where we started. On the return, we flew out of Seghe, which is over here, took a motorboat across this big open crossing, which was actually probably the most exciting part of this whole trip. It was huge seas, water crashing over the boat. But our pilot, Lazarus, was completely unconcerned. It was just another day in the office for him. You go to Tetapare, all visitors must have guides. And there is a bit of tourism on Tetapare. There's a little field station here. And if you're not interested in kayaking or camping, you can also stay in little bungalows there and go on sort of much more tame kinds of tours on Tetapare. So this trip was in June of 2017. We started at the field station and paddled around on the first day to this little bay. I don't have a ton of pictures, partially because there's a torrential downpour on the first day for most of it. But we camped there, and we did get a beautiful sunset. Some pictures of the sunset. This is the rainforest, and the bay in here. This bay had the most incredible snorkeling I've ever seen. Just coral, every kind of coral you can imagine, every kind of fish, perfectly clear water. Hard to describe. We didn't have an underwater camera. We didn't have an iPhone. And I didn't put videos in this presentation, but there are some videos that documented a little bit that we took. This is a rainforest flower that was floating in the ocean. Then the second day, we paddled onward to a little island called Saramana. And here's one of those flowers on the tree. Next slide. This is Shauna. The ocean was fairly rough at times, but our guide we felt comfortable with. He was very experienced, and we were safe. This is a giant fig tree in the rainforest. And this is interesting. This is our guide's boat. And you might say, well, that doesn't look like a great boat to take on the open ocean. And I would be inclined to agree, except he was twice as fast as we were in this thing. And the whole time, he was pretty much paddling with one arm and fishing with the other one. This guy, grew up on the ocean, and this is how people get around in this part of the world.
What's that boat made out of?
It was a fiberglass canoe with a single oar. This is sunset from Saramana. Another sunset picture. Okay, day 3, we just toured around Saramana a little bit, and then camped there again. This is the channel. Great snorkeling in this channel between the big island and Saramana. This is one of the rivers on Tetapare. It has a species of fish that only lives there and nowhere else. This is Shauna, a little bit of a sunset that day. Really calm water. It was not always like this, but the pictures I have are when it was calm. Okay, now that's a wrap for that day, and then the final day I have some nice pictures of, which we should go through quickly. So last day we paddled all the way back to the field station. It was mostly downwind, so it was quite quick, and we actually had time to snorkel and have some fun as well. Next slide. So we got up early, and beautiful sunrise. These bunch of sunrise pictures. This is Saramana at sunrise. We camped sort of right back in here. There's the sun. Actually, the previous day, a crocodile in the morning came swimming by here, which was interesting to see. Sunrise. And then a picture of the island. And that's the main island. So I was already on my way out. They were just getting going. This is all of Saramana right there. It has 2 or 3 palm trees total. That's the main Tetapare. Another picture of Saramana. And a nice rainbow as we were getting going. I thought this leaf looked like an unusual face. This is that coral reef. This picture does not do it justice, but it gives you an idea of the types of corals that we were snorkeling in. This is Lazarus, and that's actually a better picture of what his canoe looked like. We, at times, were in really big swells, and he was able to pilot this thing through it without any trouble. This is the coral reef, lots of elkhorn corals. Very little bleaching. The corals were damaged by a tsunami, I think it was 5 years ago, but the reefs are really quite healthy there. This was another beach we landed at and did some snorkeling. And I think there's one more picture. This is a sort of swampy creek next to a lake called Crocodile Lake. And I believe it's aptly named. Last picture. This is the parking lot for the airport in Saikai. The airstrip was right kind of back here, and that's what you got.
That is a nice wide-brimmed hat you have.
Thank you. I'm very fair-skinned, so it's important. And that's Lazarus, of course. Okay, to wrap up. So I thought I'd wrap up with, first of all, some tips and lessons from tropical kayaking. And I really just have 2 more slides, and then can get out of here. So the first lesson that we've learned, and you guys might already know this, but tropics always find the windiest spot possible to camp, no matter what. It's the opposite of what you do here. Find a local outfitter. Some kind of local connection is really the only way to do these kind of trips. Fall and spring are the best seasons. They're the shoulder seasons typically, unless you're right on the equator between the rainy season and the dry season. Dry season is windy. Rainy season is, well, rainy. So if you're right on the edge, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Shoes and socks in the water, not sandals. Sandals, you'll get sand in them. You'll tear up your feet with the salt water right away. Long pants, long sleeves. An important lesson is that nothing will dry ever. Bring a small fan for the tent at night. And connected with that is that it's going to rain almost every night. Yeah?
So what kind of a fan do you have?
It's like this little battery-powered hand fan. And it's rechargeable. And we brought a sort of extra battery that you could charge off of. So it doesn't last the whole night, but it's enough to get you to sleep, and then things kind of cool down a little bit. And we don't use it every night, but if we're in a place where there's no breeze, it's super handy. Yeah?
Are there mosquitoes?
Yes, of varying quantities. The Bahamas had lots of mosquitoes and also no-see-ums. The Gunayala had practically none, which was remarkable. Sian-Khan, some kind of in between. In the Solomon Islands, there were a moderate number, but there's quite a few tropical diseases there to worry about, so even a few were worrisome in the Solomon Islands. Yeah?
Our parking lot closes in 20 minutes, so maybe we could get up and start packing.
Yeah, anyway, so give me 2 minutes to wrap up. So that's that. Next slide. I wanted to say that professionally, I'm a computational biologist. I study microbial ecology. Happy to chat about that. Next slide. And I also am amateur photographer, so if you want to see more pictures, that's my website. And then final slide is acknowledgements. So these are all the websites of the people that we've worked with. This is my contact and my website. Thank you very much.